ring.
So what is rain? It's not even loaded.
Don't be an asshole. Come on, hand it. Jesus, you two. All right, hand it over.
The film opens with Paul Maguire waiting outside the school his daughter attends. When he notices that Caitlyn has tattoos, he scolds her briefly. She quickly reassures him, explaining that the tattoos were done as part of a school project, which eases his concern. Paul then drives Caitlyn home and gives her a small lecture about always putting effort into her studies. Later, Paul meets up with his longtime friends, Kane, who owns a bar, and Danny. He plans to celebrate his birthday at Kane's bar and carefully make sure everything is handled properly. Before leaving, Paul firmly warns Kane not to serve alcohol to Caitlyn or her friends, only leaving once Kane promises to follow his instructions. Afterward, Paul appears alongside the town's mayor for a press interview. As the owner of a construction company, Paul has partnered with the mayor on a plan that will create 100 new jobs. The profits from the project are intended to support medical research and educational initiatives. Later that night, Paul and his new wife, Vanessa, get ready to attend an important charity event. While they are away, Caitlyn remains at Paul's house with her friends Evan and Mike. Paul knows that Mike works as a dishwasher, and he promises to help him secure a job at his construction company during the summer. Paul also notices the way Mike looks at Caitlyn, sensing that the young man has feelings for her. He pulls Mike aside for a private conversation and makes it clear that dating his daughter comes with conditions. After confirming that Mike is not using drugs, Paul gives him permission to see Caitlyn. Meanwhile, Paul and Vanessa stay out well past midnight, speaking with another couple about Paul's business affairs. Back at the house, Caitlyn and her close friends spend the evening quietly watching a movie. The story suddenly takes a dark turn when a police cruiser is seen moving through the quiet streets late at night. Detective John, a man hardened by years of dealing with violent cases, approaches Paul. Given Paul's criminal past, encounters like this are nothing new to him. However, this time the detective is not there to question him about his history. Instead, Detective John delivers devastating news about Caitlyn. Shocked, Paul rushes home, only to discover that his daughter is missing. Evan and Mike explain that masked men broke into the house and kidnapped her. They tried to stop the intruders but were threatened at gunpoint and forced to stand down. Detective John urges Paul to trust the police and allow them to handle the investigation, promising that every possible effort will be made to find Caitlyn. The weight of the moment grows heavier when Vanessa, overcome with emotion, begs Paul to do whatever is necessary to bring their daughter home. The following day, news channels broadcast reports about Caitlyn's disappearance, calling on the public to assist the police with any information. While the authorities continue their search, Paul becomes consumed by his own theory. He begins to believe the kidnapping is an act of revenge connected to his criminal past, especially his earlier conflict with Ivan. Disregarding police warnings, Paul decides to conduct his own investigation, as he steels himself for what lies ahead. Memories of his former life in crime resurface. He seeks out Mike, hoping to uncover any details about the men who took Caitlyn. Their conversation quickly turns tense. Paul angrily questions why Mike failed to protect his daughter. Mike explains how sudden and chaotic the attack was, confessing that he desperately wishes he could have saved her. Running out of options, Paul turns to Kane and Danny for help, offering them money for their assistance. They immediately reject the payment, making it clear that their loyalty is rooted in brotherhood, not cash. Their search leads them to Oliver, a familiar name in the criminal underworld. The confrontation escalates when tensions rise with Oliver's girlfriend, but despite the hostility, they gain nothing useful about Caitlyn's location. Defeated, Kane and Danny return to Paul and admit they've reached a dead end. Shortly after, Paul's fragile restraint collapses completely when the police discover Caitlyn's body inside a storm drain. The devastating confirmation crushes him, leaving him broken and hollow. After Caitlyn's funeral, Paul is approached by an old associate named O'Connell. He advises Paul to stay away from violence and allow the authorities to handle the case, reminding him that he left the criminal world behind for a reason. O'Connell warns that returning to mob tactics will only reopen old wounds and invite disaster. Later, Kane and Danny visit Paul at his home, triggering a flashback to their shared criminal past. Years earlier, the three had ambushed a Russian mobster who was transporting money to his superior. The robbery turned out far larger than expected. Along with a Russian TT pistol, they seized a suitcase packed with cash. That money gave Paul the chance to abandon crime and build a legitimate life. However, the robbery ignited a long and violent conflict between their Irish crime circle and the Russian Mafia, a war whose consequences would resurface years later. As the investigation continued, the police uncovered a crucial detail. Caitlyn had been killed with a Russian TT pistol. The discovery was deeply troubling, as it matched the same type of weapon Paul once used to kill a Russian mobster years earlier. Recognizing the sensitivity of this connection, the detective quietly instructed another officer to keep the information confidential. In the days that followed, Paul repeatedly returned to Caitlyn's school to collect her personal belongings. Meanwhile, Kane and Danny independently arrived at the same disturbing conclusion, that the murder weapon was indeed a Russian TT pistol. Kane visits Paul to discuss the implication of the firearm. Because the Russian TT is commonly used within criminal circles, Paul begins to narrow his suspicions, gaining a clearer picture of who may be responsible for his daughter's death. Paul and his friends begin pressuring and threatening anyone who might be linked to Chernoff, the notorious mob boss whose money they stole 17 years earlier. They believe Chernoff is behind Caitlyn's death, and that the past has finally come back to punish them. Vanessa, who initially supported Paul's determination to find answers, starts to grow uneasy. She fears that he is slipping back into the violent identity he once abandoned. At the same time, she wrestles with a harsher realization that perhaps Paul never truly left that life behind, and that violence has always been a part of who he is. Paul and his allies push deeper into their search. Their efforts lead them to a Russian criminal named Vori, someone they had violently crossed paths with in the past. Paul confronts him aggressively, and when the beating escalates, Vori attempts to escape. Paul chases after him, and the man ultimately collapses and bleeds out. Later, an investigator confronts Paul directly, warning him that his actions have crossed a dangerous line. He makes it clear that if Paul continues down this path, an arrest will be unavoidable. Paul ignores the warning entirely. That same night, Paul joins Kane and Danny as they storm the home of Russian drug traffickers tied to the Russian Mafia. What follows is a brutal massacre, with the three men killing everyone inside the building. The following day, detectives and police officers arrive at the massacre site. It does not take long for the lead investigator to determine that Paul and his associates were behind the killings. Their violent actions have severely damaged Chernov's operations and resulted in the deaths of several of his men. In response, the Russian crime boss shifts his focus directly toward Paul and his friends. Days later, retaliation comes swiftly. Late at night, a group of Russian gangsters enters Kane's bar under the cover of darkness. The calm atmosphere is instantly shattered by gunfire. In the middle of the chaos, Kane fights back with everything he has, but he is eventually overwhelmed. He is beaten down and dragged away by the attackers. As Kane's fate hangs in the balance, Paul speeds toward the bar, panic driving him forward. He arrives just in time to see the Russian attackers fleeing the scene and immediately gives chase. His pursuit is cut short when multiple police vehicles block his path. During the standoff, a hard-looking detective confronts Paul and delivers a final warning. Surprisingly, instead of arresting him, the detective lets him go. Elsewhere, Kane is at the mercy of his captors. Chernoff himself steps in, cold and vengeful, repeatedly beating Kane without restraint. At the same time, Paul rushes to Danny's home to tell him that Kane has been taken. Meanwhile, Kane confronts Chernoff, convinced that Caitlyn's murder was revenge for a robbery committed long ago. Chernoff responds with fury and confusion, then drops a devastating revelation. The Russian mobster they killed years earlier was his brother. As the truth comes out, Paul's thoughts begin to shift. His suspicion turns toward Danny. He wonders if Danny betrayed them in the past, and if that betrayal ultimately led to Caitlyn's death. Only the three of them know what truly happened, but Paul's doubt continues to grow. Their original plan had been simple: disappear with the stolen money and live quietly, far from crime. But rage takes over. Paul confronts Danny, and the argument spirals into violence, permanently destroying their friendship. When it's over, Paul is left alone, forced to face the weight of what he has done. Meanwhile, Chernoff arranges a meeting with O'Connell. During their encounter, the truth about Paul's role in restarting the old gang war comes to light. O'Connell refuses to cooperate or back down, and his defiance costs him his life, triggering even more bloodshed. Hidden deep inside Paul's closet sits a reminder of his violent history, a Tokarev pistol from years ago. The weapon is a direct link to the robbery that sparked the brutal gang war, a chapter of his life Paul has tried desperately to bury. Its cold weight carries memories he would rather forget. One night, Evan sends Mike a mysterious message, urging him to meet in secret. When Mike arrives at the location, something feels wrong. Paul is already there, waiting in the shadows, gripping a gun. The air between them is thick with tension, every second stretched tight with fear and uncertainty. As time drags on, Mike finally breaks. His frantic begging turns into a full confession, and the truth comes pouring out. On the night in question, alcohol was flowing freely, and curiosity about Paul's gun collection took over. In the chaos, a gun accidentally discharged, changing everything in an instant. Fear took control, and the teenagers fabricated the kidnapping story to cover up what had really happened. Paul struggles internally, torn between rage and grief. In the end, he makes a difficult decision. He refuses to let violence define him completely and spares Mike's life, giving him a chance to live with what he's done. Paul walks away, carrying the unbearable weight of the truth with him. Paul returns home and calls Vanessa, finally opening up about the moment his life descended into crime. He confesses how it all began and apologizes for the damage his past has caused. He assures her that everything will soon be over, unaware that the consequences of his history are already closing in. He tells her about the first life he ever took, how a knife was placed in his hand during a bar fight, and how that single act set him on a violent path. As armed men arrive and surround him, Paul makes a final decision. He stabs himself, ending his life as they storm the room. Vanessa arrives home shortly after, only to witness police officers carrying Paul's body away. She watches in silent devastation, tears filling her eyes. And that is how it ended. Make sure to like and subscribe for more videos like this. And you can find this movie in the description below or our comment section. Thanks for watching.